Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. Um, I'm going to read a couple of things that I wrote that I think are sort of relevant to the conversation, and then afterwards open up the floor to some questions and make it a little bit more casual. And I can walk you through some of the photos that are going to be scrolling. So, okay. Growing up literary. Of my introduction long ago to the rich literary culture of the Hamptons, I remember best the nose hair. In the fall, my father would often take me to play touch football in the fields behind Peter Mathiessen's house. Unbeknownst to me, gathered there in the mud in the long October light were some of the finest literary minds in the world. Among a smattering of other artists, writers, and editors was our host, Matthiessen, the great author, naturalist, and Zen master. There was James Salter, a genius of the craft, known for penning perfect sentences, beautiful and clean, that could break a man's heart. And there was, of course, my father, George Plimpton, author, participatory journalist, and editor of the Paris Review. I was 8, 9, 10 years old and knew nothing of their literary triumphs. To me, my dad was not some legendary figure, but only my dad. These giants of literature were simply his friends. So it is that I do not recall from those October afternoons any witty literary banter or amusing anecdotes about beautiful muses or unfinished novels. In fact, of these figures towering over me in the huddle, their voices hushed and conspiratorial as they called out the next play, I remember only the nose hair, looking up into great unkempt forests of it, sprouting and curling out of the nostrils of strange, lanky men. It was only later on that I began to realize how wonderfully unlikely it was for an area to boast such a vibrant culture of artists and writers. The East End of Long Island was, of course, the perfect spot for a community like this to take root. Not too far from the city, filled with golden light and good green farmland, the potato fields running down to the sea. But no one could ever have imagined that it would one day blossom into this. Everyone was out there. Truman Capote, Irwin Shaw, E.L. Doctorow, Tom Wolfe in his famous white suit. Sag Main Street, where we lived for many years, was like some kind of central artery for the literary lifeblood of the Hamptons. Half a block away was John Irving, the National Book Award winner and best-selling author. Another National Book Award winner, James Jones, who'd penned From Here to Eternity and The Thin Red Line, had lived down the street. Our next-door neighbor was Kurt Vonnegut. Kurt used to get a little prickly when in my teenage years I'd blast Bob Dylan out our windows. "The man's not only a bad singer, he's a bad poet," Kurt would exclaim. And down the road toward the beach, just a ways, was yet another National Book Award winner, Peter Matthiessen, the only person ever, in fact, to win the award for both fiction and nonfiction. Peter had gone to grade school in New York with my dad, and in 1953, long before either made the move to the Hamptons, he had invited my father over to Paris to help found and edit a magazine called the Paris Review. The intent behind the Paris Review was original and clear. Its founding editors, Matthiessen, Tom Ginsberg, Harold L. Humes, William Styron, John Train, and my dad, wanted to create a magazine that would publish fiction, poetry, and art, much of it from newly discovered talent. Most uniquely, it would be free from the heavy-handed reviews and literary criticism that they believe had bogged down the form. Rather than relying on critics to analyze the art of writing, the review would go, as my dad once put it, straight to the horse's mouth, turning to the writers themselves to talk about their craft. This series of groundbreaking interviews would go on to include conversations with Hemingway, Faulkner, Nabokov, and Joan Didion, to name just a few, and would later be called, ironically by a critic, one of the single most persistent acts of cultural conservation in the history of the world. As time passed, the other founding editors moved on to pursue their own literary careers. My father remained faithfully, stubbornly, at the magazine's helm. Soon, he was editing the quarterly from his home in New York overlooking the East River on 72nd Street, where I grew up. There was a large flat upstairs, wide and open and good for parties, and downstairs, tucked away in a separate small first-floor studio, like a wayward son too old to still be living at home, was the review's office. Down there, in a clutter of old photos, papers, books, posters, flags, and other random memorabilia, my dad's bicycle hung from the ceiling, as did his lion-taming chair, An ever-shifting array of hip, sharp literary minds, many of them bright young writers who would go on to large careers, helped my father edit the magazine. The most junior among them, the interns or readers who worked for free, poured through the infamous slush pile, the stacks and stacks of unsolicited manuscripts from faceless, no-name writers, looking for something of worth to pass up to the higher editors. I myself was an intern there the winter semester of my senior year in high school, and it was mostly a thankless job. Many of the short stories and poems you slogged through were dull and very, very bad. But it was also, in some senses, the most important job at the review, because you were the one potentially responsible for finding the Holy Grail, an undiscovered writer with a piece of writing so good it had to be published. It didn't happen very often, but every now and then there would be a find, and it would be a big one. Philip Roth, Jay McInerney, T.C. Boyle, B.S. Naipaul, and Rick Moody were all first discovered in the review. Early work of then unknown writers like Jack Kerouac and Terry Southern also found its ways into the pages. The Paris Review became known as a venue where unpublished writers could make their big break, and my father relished this. Indeed, it was his greatest pride and pleasure that his magazine was responsible for finding and introducing bright new literary talent to the world. In a sense, it was what he lived for. My dad would, of course, go on to have an extraordinary career of his own, filled with literary accomplishments and random acts of bravery, adventures in participatory journalism and roles in Oscar-winning films, but the Review was the thing he always returned home to. In many ways, the Paris Review was his first child. He was there for it when no one else was. He sheltered it, spent time with it, fawned over it, adored it. He put issues of it to bed with great care and loving attention. He agonized over it, worried about it, slaved over it, believed in it. It made him proud. And though it got in the way of his own writing and cost him enormous sums of money and sanity, he forever refused to give up on it. My father treated my sisters and me with a similar tenderness, but in a more hands-off kind of way. He did not do much fiddling and molding, as an editor inevitably must. Instead, as if we were writers whose talent he instinctively believed in, he allowed us the freedom to explore our own paths, as an editor inevitably also must. I see now that this was not neglect, but true love. My dad's own father, my grandfather, had been the opposite, overbearing, invasive, critical, cruel. In the middle of a high school baseball game, my grandfather had yanked my dad from the field because his hair, a little long, had grown over his ears. My dad, on the other hand, might not have approved of some of the things we did, but he let us live our own lives. He may have loved us from a bit of a distance, but he loved us for who we were, not for who he wanted us to be. In high school, my own hair grew wild and far past my shoulders. With great, unending love, he never once asked me to cut it. The Paris Review was not just a magazine, but a kind of social experiment. My father had fallen in love with the movable feast feel of post-war Paris, the writers and artists cluttering the cafes and little bookstores, inexpensive living and expansive minds, a world full of conversation, creativity, big new ideas. When my father brought the Review back to New York from Paris, he brought that sense of communal excitement and celebration with him. He would go on to replicate this literary salon not just in the magazine, for what else is a magazine but a gathering of creative minds, but in his home in New York as well. And so on 72nd Street, there were parties, big parties, legendary parties. My dad was a gracious host, endlessly, wonderfully curious about each person he met, and so everyone was welcome. Athletes and artists, writers and actors, old politicians and beautiful young women. My mom and later my stepmom were not always so accepting about the invasion of their private space by this movable feast, but for me and my siblings, it was simply the norm, a home in perpetual social and literary motion, abuzz with possibility and cocktail chatter. It was this same sense of creative community that my dad would find and nurture on Long Island. Matthiessen had moved here in 1959, the first of his generation of writers to call the area home, and by the mid-60s, when my dad became a regular, the East End had already become a hotbed of arts and literature. As in Paris and New York, he felt right at home. My father loved Long Island. For him, almost everything out there had a literary bent to it. If he wasn't playing tennis with me, it was with Matthiessen, Salter, Peter Jennings. Interesting people were everywhere. The summer nights were long and warm and filled with fireworks. From a rented beach house in Wainscott, he and my mom threw Bastille Day parties that everyone came to, and my dad and other wild, drunken literary geniuses would stumble around the dunes in the dark with torches, giggling and lighting up the sky. This annual bash would later morph into the Boys Harbor Fireworks Show, which every year he would MC, his big, distinguished voice booming out over the loudspeakers. "Hold on to your hats, ladies and gentlemen." Some weekends there would be a house guest, often Jerzy Kosinski, the eccentric Polish-American novelist, who would bring his own blanket and pillow and sleep in the back of his car. He liked small spaces, and he preferred my kiddie pool to the sea just over the dunes. He was afraid of water. Later, when we'd moved to Sag, Maine, even normal neighborhood issues took on a decidedly literary flair. On their way to get their morning papers at the general store, my father and Vonnegut would debate, for instance, the problem of the model airplanes that wind annoyingly through the Sagaponack sky. Should they be eliminated by the swoops of trained falcons, as my father suggested? Or, as Kurt proposed, should a miniature submarine rise to the surface of his pool, launching heat-seeking missiles? These were the sorts of serious, everyday matters that occupied the great literary minds of Sag Main Street. My dad had a lot of fun out there. He still spent part of every day at work, writing and editing away. Like all writers, he was forever and never on vacation. But the rest of his time he used wisely. He had a beat-up old motorboat he would take out into Gardiner's Bay to fish for blues. On the highways, he could be seen motoring around in his prized possession, a battered Vietnam-era Army Jeep, a gift from my mom. On its back bumper, there was an image of Mickey Mouse giving you the finger. Ever the gentleman, my dad had the protrusion painted over so that it merely looked like Mickey was shaking his fist. In August, there was the annual Artist-Writers softball game, which he attended religiously and with great pride and pleasure. He was, after all, the only man playing who had once pitched to Willie Mays. Above all, he had good friends out there, not just literary, but from every walk of life, and he loved spending time with them and with his family. In the shadow of late afternoons, there were cocktails on green lawns, sunsets on the bay, good conversation, laughter. Out on Long Island, my father was surrounded by a community he loved, and it loved him back dearly. He somehow embodied the best of what the Hamptons had to offer: creativity, celebrity, community, fun. He had a way of reminding me, and everyone else out there, I think, of the good, pure essence of summer. When I imagine him on Long Island, I think of long, hot tennis matches in the sun, refreshing dips in the cold sea. I think of good friends and family gathered together, the magic of fireworks on soft satin summer nights, happy children running barefoot through the sand. My father passed away in his sleep in the fall of 2003. It was a great loss for everyone who knew him personally and for many who did not. After he died, the summers on Long Island felt like they were missing something, a guardian angel perhaps, but life continues much the same. In the heat of the afternoons, there's still tennis, and in the cool of the evenings, fireworks still light up the sky. I'm not sure it could ever really exist in the same way out here again, that golden literary convergence of yesteryear. So many of those central figures have now passed: Matthiessen, Salter, Doctorow, Vonnegut. But other writers, good writers, amazing writers, still call the East End home. Colson Whitehead, Jay McInerney, A.M. Holmes. Sure, one grand, white-haired figure no longer graces the diamond, lumbering his way to first base, yet the artists and writers softball game plays on. And you never know, someday soon, a whole new generation of creative young minds may fill its thinning ranks. Okay, this one is called Man in Firework. We shot Dad up into the sky finally, some 2.5 years after he died. These were, in fact, his wishes, for his ashes to be packed into his favorite firework, the Kamuro, also known as the boy's haircut, or Japanese willow, a golden cascade of light that hangs there for a moment, shimmering, before winking off into the darkness. I was charged with packing my father's remains into the fireworks myself. His ashes were locked away in a box within a box. To open the first, there was a tiny key you could lose down the bathroom sink. The inner box had no latch or lever. You had to unfasten 4 screws and lift off the whole top. And then there they were, double-bagged in clear, heavy-duty plastic, my father's remains. If you have never seen human ashes, they are not what one might suspect. Mixed in with the fine ash are little chips of tooth and bone. And there was so much of him there, a big, clear, hefty sack's worth of the stuff. And to see him like this, my grand old dad, such a force of life, reduced to this bag of dust and bone, it sucked the wind out of me, made me gulp back tears. I proceeded anyway. Phil Grucci, an old friend of my dad's and one of the heads of the famed fireworks family, was there to show me how to pack the fireworks. They were 6-inch plastic shells, white and round, separated into 2 pieces like a halved melon. First, I lined the edges of each half with small round pellets called stars. When the firework exploded, these would ignite and project outwards in streams of golden light. Next came my father's ash, poured into the center with an ice scoop. To top it off, I sifted in the burst charge, a blend of rice hulls and black powder. And then Phil, gingerly, like flipping an omelet, would put the 2 finished halves together. It was late June. In a few weeks' time, at the annual Devon Yacht Club 4th of July show in Amagansett, it would happen. Unbeknownst to anyone watching the spectacle, but for family, friends, and the Gruccis, 3 fireworks containing the remains of George Plimpton would be rocketed up into the night sky, bursting into a final sad flash of color and scattering him to the winds and waters of Gardiner's Bay. Until then, my father would remain in the heart of the fireworks, packed in there tight with the gunpowder and stars, and I imagine that he wouldn't have minded it so much, resting there for a while amongst all that enormous potential energy, the only thing between him and exploding into a blinding ball of light, a simple match. I love how unexpected it was, my father's passion for pyrotechnics. I mean, who would have imagined that this great intellectual figure, with his white hair and distinguished old New England accent, would ever love something as simple-minded and childlike as fireworks? Not many adults would necessarily admit to such a thing. The oohs and ahs one hears in the crowd emerge, for the most part, from the lips of wonder-filled children, and sometimes their encouraging parents. It was no doubt a rather whimsical hobby for a serious journalist, accomplished author, and important editor to indulge in, but my father was unabashed about it. He was, in fact, the fireworks commissioner of New York City, an honorary title that had no real bearing, but of which he was nonetheless tremendously proud. He had written a beautiful and funny and sad book, Fireworks, A History and Celebration. When you look at a list of his works, all those sports memoirs and Paris Review anthologies, it seems a little out of place until you spot the 2 children's books he'd penned as well. Oh yes, and then there was one of his favorite t-shirts, a yellow one that read on its front, Pyrotechnician Extraordinaire, and on its back had an image of Wile E. Coyote holding a large lit firework and looking rather bewildered, as if he hadn't quite realized he'd been duped yet again. If you knew that my dad loved fireworks, you somehow knew everything about him. The fact they deal in dynamite spoke to his sense of adventure. Their careful choreography and wondrous rush of color indicated his great love of beauty. Even in his 70s, a perfect sentence, a pretty cheek, each still could break his heart. Their communal nature, the way they gathered people together in a mood of celebration, clued you into his infectious enthusiasm about life and everyone in it. But most importantly, my dad's love of fireworks hinted at the kid within him, his big, boyish wonder. After all, it takes the young at heart to truly appreciate colorful explosions in the sky, and until his dying day, this is what my dad forever was. In private, there was plenty of proof. He was, for instance, always slightly disheveled, like a kid coming home from roughhousing in the park, the sole of one loafer coming unglued, a rip in the elbow of his blazer, an innocuous bloodstain or 2 on his Oxford shirt. He hardly ever took showers, but was extremely fond of baths and of the assortment of toys that lined the edges of his tub, wind-up battleships and rubber ducks, presumably to make bath time more fun. And back in the day when we watched Tom and Jerry together, I swear he enjoyed it even more than I did, his great staccato laughter erupting helplessly at the cat's comically doomed escapades. Poor old Tom, he'd say, shaking his head and wiping the tears from his eyes. There were, of course, more public examples of this youthful spirit. Consider his famous participatory adventures. What were they really but childhood fantasies, somehow miraculously come to life? Pitching to Willie Mays, tending goal against Gretzky, playing with the New York Philharmonic. These were the daydreams of schoolboys, unrealistic, foolish, impossible. But for my dad, reality was never some static, fixed thing. That was why he was such a hero of sorts. His existence proved that life was limited only by imagination. It was whatever you could dream it to be. You could fly through the air on a trapeze, take photos for Playboy, drive a race car, tame lions, anything. Everything was possible. You could do it all, and he did. The universe was a great gift, offering up endless excitement and fun. And all you really needed to receive this gift was a child's perspective, that simple, open-eyed wonder. Those were my father's eyes. They twinkled with laughter and mischief. Each day was an adventure, every instant to be enjoyed. Yes, with a wonderful boyish enthusiasm, my father played at life. For him, it was a game, and if you were having fun, you were winning. There are people who would perhaps call me a dilettante, he said, because it looks as though I'm having too much fun. I have never been convinced there's anything inherently wrong in having fun. My dad had a lot of fun. His whole world seemed predicated on this. The parties, the participatory adventures, the pranks. His stories, whether told in person or on paper, were usually funny ones, involving mishaps and comic failures, oddball personalities and unlikely fauna, a rare woodpecker perhaps, or an elephant with particularly long tusks. His wrinkles were from laughter, good long years of it, and from life and the deep pleasure he took in it. Yes, for my dad, life was about spreading mischief and light, making the world a more interesting place. Fireworks were one of the ways you did this. After all, the way he saw it, the night sky was beautiful as it was, sure, but it was more beautiful when fireworks lit it up, and it was certainly more fun. And so for my dad, any reason was a good reason for fireworks. Birthday, fireworks. Wedding, fireworks. House guest, fireworks. One weekend at our place in Wainscott, Ted Kennedy came to visit. The result, fireworks. And the arrest of my father for not having the proper permits. When he returned from jail, he was visibly shaken. The only time my mom had ever seen him so. He simply couldn't understand how something so innocent could get one arrested. Of course, this wasn't the only time fireworks had landed him in trouble. At the same beach house, he'd held an annual Bastille Day show, the best party of the summer, until the year an errant ember fell on a man's arm, singeing him. The guy sued my father for $11 million. My dad, horrified and amused, told a reporter, quote, that anyone who had an arm valued at $11 million should be pitching for the Chicago White Sox. And then there was the Fat Man. To celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Harvard Lampoon, where he had been editor, more evidence of his mischievous nature, my father proposed the construction of the world's largest firework. Enlisting the help of his old fireworks manufacturing friends, the Grucci family, they assembled a 720-pound monster with a diameter of 40.5 inches. The first Fat Man, tested at the Grucci's compound on Long Island, failed to launch, exploding instead in its steel mortar in the ground. The blast hurled giant pieces of shrapnel up to a quarter-mile away and left a crater in the earth some 20 feet deep and 50 across. Fat Man 2 was a slightly better success. Launched near the Kennedy Space Center on a spit in Florida's Indian River, it rose 50 feet or so into the air in a ball of white-hot flame, its massive concussion shattering windows and setting off burglar alarms for miles in all directions. I spoke to Phil Grucci recently to check some facts about our construction of the ash-laden shells. He talked a little bit about my father and about his own. They were always up to mischief, he told me, your father and mine. And then he said something about my dad that, coming from a fireworks man, seemed the highest compliment. He had a way of lending light to everything he did. But my dad's life was not immune to darkness, and neither were fireworks. In 1983, there had been an explosion at the Grucci's factory. The compound was leveled. Phil's father, Jimmy Grucci, as well as a cousin, Donna Gruber, were killed. Except for my grandfather's passing, this was one of my first experiences of death close to home. I remember my dad trying to explain it to me, quiet, at a loss. A horrifying tragedy had occurred to a family close to him, to dear friends, and he didn't know what to do with it. There was the same strange fallen quiet on his usually animated demeanor whenever someone dear to him passed. He was such a hopeful, excited human being, just a big kid, really. And in his worldview, dying didn't make any sense. For him, life was about life. It was about living, and there was no room in it for death. And so there would be that quiet, his face long and tired and sad, the child in him a little older. But then, sooner or later, because he didn't know what else to do, he would turn back to the business of life and of living it well. After constructing the first firework, I got the knack of it. Little was said. Phil stood at my side, quiet, understanding, resolute, as I scooped my father's ashes into the shells and the tears rolled down my face. There was no hiding them from Phil, and no need to. He had lost a father, too. I wiped my tears on my sleeves, and my hands, coated in a fine layer of ash and gunpowder, I wiped on my jeans. When the shells were filled and it was done, we said goodbye. I wouldn't say it's been a pleasure, he said, but it's been a great honor. It was the kind of night my dad would have loved. Good friends and family gathered together on a fine July night, beach chairs in the sand, blankets, food and drink, children playing and running amok. Down the beach to the left just a ways was Devon, where I had grown up playing tennis with my dad and going to summer camp, sailing and swimming laps among the red jellyfish. The Devon fireworks are never the biggest show of the summer, but you cannot beat the setting. The big glassy waters of the bay spread out before you, Gardener's Island in the distance, the sun setting, the sky and water going purple, the darkness coming on. My father would have awaited the darkness eagerly, for he knew that when its curtain finally fell, the fireworks would begin. The fireworks began. It was a beautiful show. The sky lit up with pink and blue and red and white. Around me, the faces of the people I loved, the people my father loved, lit up too. I am always amazed by how beautiful people look at a fireworks show, their heads tilted tenderly towards the sky as if receiving a gift, their eyes open and alert yet filled with dreams, their skin all aflush with color and light. I love how, for a moment or two at least, everyone becomes a child again. It reminds me of the way my father looked when he watched a show, that big, wonderful, boyish grin on his face, a face lit up from within and without at once, as if the fireworks above him were not only gracing his cheek, but sparking some fuel well of wonder within him, so that on the inside and out, he was simply all aglow. My father's fireworks, the boys' haircuts, were to be shot up last, just after the finale. The Grucci finale is world famous. It's not just about the sight of it either, though the sky does fill with blossoms. It's the sound, the bright shocks of light followed by a barrage of thunder that you can feel in your chest, your heart. With a flourish, the fireworks ended. There was a pause, a breath, a reverent moment of silence, as if in honor, as if in salute. And then they shot them up. You could see the shells tracing golden up into the sky, and an instant later, hear the sound of their launch, 6 quick cannon shots over the sea. They reached their apex and exploded, 3 full-size Kimuras blooming below in tribute, and above, my father's shells. My dad's were not the biggest fireworks ever. After all, his ashes had taken the place of some of the usual stars and gunpowder. But they were lovely, and they burst into brilliant wisps of light, fine and flowing, like horses' tails. Soon the 6 fireworks merged into one. A golden cascade of sunshine rained down across the bay. And then, as if reluctant to part, my father hung there in the sky for a moment, still all a shimmer, before he was caught by the wind and drifted off to the east, his gentle glow fading into the sweet Long Island night. Thank you all for letting me share that with you guys. So, yeah, can make it more casual at this point. Any questions that I can respond to, or any memories that you all want to share, or anything? I can also take you through a few of these photos. So I do want to thank Jill Kremens, Kurt Vonnegut's wife, who was generous enough to let me show a few of her photos. This is one of them. You can tell they're Jill's because they're always signed at the bottom and dated. But this is July 4th, 1974. You know, I didn't realize actually until looking through her photos that the original fireworks shows were at my parents' place in Amagansett. And that was a July 4th show that I think eventually became the Devon show. But then when they moved to Wainscott, it became the Bastille Day show, and then they moved on to do that at Boys Harbor. So yeah, so anyway, this is my dad in 1974 on July 4th. Obviously, pretty excited and about to set off some fireworks. And he's wearing his Paris Review t-shirt. So this next shot is a luncheon at Kurt and Jill's in East Hampton, the rented place in East Hampton in 1976, about 25 days before I was born. And seated left to right is Irwin Shaw, Kurt, my dad, Swifty Lazar, and Gene Young. I mean, it's just amazing. And then here is another group of amazing literary minds. This is at a 40th Paris Review 40th year celebration at a lunch hosted by Liz Fundaras. In the front row is my dad. He's the only one, I guess, in the front row. And then in the second row is John Ashbery, the great poet, E.L. Doctorow, and Bill Styron. And then the back row is Willie Morris, Peter Matthiessen, Rose Styron, John Train, and James Salter. I mean, what a crew of amazing people and writers. Let's see. And then this is my dad and Peter at that same July 4th show. I think of all these people, I think Peter might have been one of the few people who lived out here full time. And my dad was back and forth between here and the city. But Peter spent most of his time in his house in Sagaponack, and he was a big fisherman. He wrote a wonderful book called Men's Lives, which is about the local fishermen out here. And then he also had on his property, which is where we played those football games, he also had a little zendo, which is where he would practice Zen, and he had a whole community that would come and join him in sit meditation, and he would give talks. And so he was quite a man as well. In the boat on the top, that's my mom, Freddie. And I believe I'm not actually sure who's in the center. It might be Bill Styron, and then my dad on the right. And then below, I'm pretty sure that is Bill Styron and my dad. And this is like the only picture I've ever seen with my dad at the beach when he wasn't like, setting off fireworks. He never he wasn't like a beach guy. My mom loved the beach. I would go with her and she'd tan and we'd spend the whole day there. But seeing him with his shirt off at the beach is it's like seeing a Yeti. It's not. So that's a very rare photo. And I think this is me when I was out on the boat with my dad. And then this is I think one of my first memories is this gorilla. So just thought I'd have to put it in there. I don't know. I really don't remember that. I think he was I think he was supposed to be King Kong, and that's how I imagine him, but I don't know what I called him. Kongy. And this is actually at my grandparents' house in Huntington, and every time we were there, I think this might have been for Thanksgiving or Christmas. We would play touch football, and so this is me in the huddle with, I think, my dad and my sister and maybe an uncle or something like that. But I wanted to get one of these huddles in here, although there wouldn't have been a ton of nose hair in this one. And then me and my dad. He was the way that he connected with me the most over the years was through sports. I played a ton of tennis with him, but also football and baseball, and that was sort of the arena in which we both felt sort of most comfortable with each other. And beyond that, he didn't do much fathering. Yeah, there I am poking at his shoe. I believe this is Jerzy Kaczynski holding me up in my Superman costume. He was an amazing writer. Being There is one of his amazing books, which I think became a movie with Peter Sellers. And wrote a whole bunch of other amazing stuff as well. This is my dad and my sister Medora. I think those bucket hats were like all the rage back then. And this is at our house in Wainscott. I don't know what's going on that we're all looking at. Maybe some sort of clown show or something. Yeah, it wasn't the best shot, I guess, but there I am. There's my mom and there's my dad. And I think that might be my sister's. No, she would have been older than that. I'm not sure where my sister is. Actually, she might be the one in green. Not sure. So this is a shot of it. He went with the Grucci's in 1979. Let's see if I can actually read this caption properly. The author displays the Dragon Trophy symbolizing the Grucci victory at the fireworks competition in Monte Carlo in 1979. The trophy is not an official award. It was, in fact, purchased by the author in Cannes for the Grucci's in his excitement at their triumph. So very proud with his invented trophy there. And I have that in my office, the dragon. It's very cool. But look how proud he is. He was such a big kid. So here's my dad. I don't know if you can tell, but underneath the t-shirt says fireworks commissioner. So that's which was an honorary title at best. And then I think this is at the Brooklyn Bridge fireworks bicentennial. But you can see that sort of boyish glint in his eyes. So, any thoughts, comments, remembrances? Sorry?
I loved your reading.
Oh, thank you.
Very eloquent.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Yes, Coco.
Your dad really liked fireworks.
He loved fireworks. Yeah, he did. Good observation. No?
Father and friends you think was most influential on you as a writer?
I find it so I wrote these essays a number of years ago, but they were very relevant, obviously, to the topic, so I felt comfortable writing them. They were originally published in Plum magazine, which Christina Cuomo was the editor, and Mark, you were a publisher there, right, at the time? So it was the question, right? I've got to get back to the question. At the time, and really throughout, it's really hard not to be influenced by James Salter's work for me, because he's just so precise and so perfect with every little. There's never a misplaced comma. There's never, and I'm not to say that my writing is like that, but that's what I aspire it to be. And I'm also an editor, and I feel like he sort of spent a lot of time editing his own work. That's where he found the beauty of it for him, was in the revision process and going over it again and again until you got it as close to perfect as you could. That said, I've read in the in various Paris Review interviews, people, amazing writers. I think J.P. Donlavey is the one I'm thinking of, who said there are still parts in some of his best-selling amazing books that he just never got right, and he wished he could, and but he had to get it out there anyway. So perfection is a elusive and impossible aspiration as a writer and basically in life. And Peter Matthiessen was also, I study Zen Buddhism, and The Snow Leopard is one of my favorite books. And he was an amazing sort of creative nonfiction writer, and that's sort of the genre which I feel most comfortable writing myself, as was my dad. And then, yeah, my dad. I spent a lot of time as a budding young writer, like not wanting to read my dad's work at all. I think sort of trying to carve my own path rather than just following his. But at a certain point, I sort of, and actually I might have read some stuff while he was still around, but I think mostly after he passed, I really dug into it. And he was such a beautiful and amazing writer, and so funny. And being funny in writing is so hard. Can't try to do it. It just happens or it doesn't. But he was so funny, and so I was like, God, what did I miss? I never really got the chance to tell him how much I loved his writing, and I wish I had. So he's an influence on me, and who else? I think those are the three main ones. Yes.
It's just interesting listening to getting the theme of the talk and the literary lions out here, the list of writers that you went through in the early part of the talk. I was thinking about how well known they all were, and that obviously there's a sense of them enjoying each other's company here, but they were also here and maybe left alone, like they would have been. Look, literary figures aren't recognized on the street even anymore, but then they were really stars.
Yeah.
And so this was a refuge. Did you ever have a sense of that?
I don't think I really had a sense of that, but I know exactly what you're talking about, because it's very true. I think there's not really, not that writers aren't respected in the same way, but they were cultural figures back then, like important cultural figures, and it's just not quite the same as it was. My dad was a little bit of an odd literary celebrity because he ventured into these other realms that made him recognizable. He did commercials and he did movies, and he went and give speeches, and he did the fireworks. So he was all over the place, and maybe the most recognizable face of these guys. But yes, back then there was this sort of awe and respect for writers that there just doesn't seem to be in the same way these days. And yeah. Yeah, and I think out here was a refuge, as you say. And I think maybe, I don't know, there might have been a little bit, well, so different now out here than it was back then, but there was probably more respect and more sort of for celebrity, no matter what kind. Yes.
How did it feel growing up, watching your dad do these amazing multimedia, as you called it, participatory journalism things that out in the sports world?
Yeah.
You were his son growing up. How did you feel about it?
Well, most of them he did before I was even born. The baseball, the playing quarterback with the Lions. Trying to think what he did while I was here. I was born in 1976. I think he played goalie for the Boston Bruins. So I remember that a little bit. He was old at that point. He had me when he was 50. So he was, he was in the goal, in the goal facing these 110-mile-an-hour pucks when he was 55 or whatever it was. And then he wrote the book called Open Net. So I remember that a little bit. And then he did sort of little things here and there. Like I remember he did skeleton racing, which is it's like one of those luge type things that's in the Olympics. And so he did that. And at that point, I think I was 20. So he must have been 70 years old when he did that. So but I guess my point is I don't really remember much of that. I sort of became aware of it as I grew up. But there was this weird thing with him where for the most part, he was just sort of my dad, and he'd done all these amazing things, but I don't think I really processed it or got it. He was just sort of, he was the guy who would wander around in his underwear and have cereal in the morning rather than like this great literary figure. But I mean, amazing that I think about it now, and it sort of is so much more mind-blowing. I don't know if you all have not had the chance to see it, and I'm not exactly sure how to get it. It was on American Masters, but there was a film documentary about my dad that came out maybe 12 years ago, 13 years ago, and it's really wonderful, and it gets at all that. But I guess the reason that I'm mentioning it is I showed a friend who didn't know about my dad the intro to it, which sort of gives a little bit of the breadth of everything that he'd done in his life, which is so much. And my friend turned to me and he was like, I'm trying to think exactly what he said. He was like, "What have you done?" And so there's that aspect to it. But to be fair, compared to my dad, what has anyone done? So I try not to beat myself up about it too much. Yeah, so it's and also being given the opportunity to come and do this sort of brought up a whole bunch of old memories for me and just unprocessed feelings and things I haven't quite come to terms with about my dad. And it's funny, I'm almost 50 now, and he's been dead almost 25 years, 22 years now. But it's still, I'm still so emotional about it. I still miss him just as much, and I still love him such as much, and I'm still as confused about the whole thing as I ever was. Like, I'm supposed to be this grown-up, human being, and I still feel like a clueless teenager sometimes when it comes to all this. So, yeah.
And your, actual projection of everything you feel just comes out so clearly.
Thank you.
And it reminds me a bit of your mom, because I got to know her really well, Freddie, and she took me, I went to a party at your house once where your dad was there. And the one thing I knew about him, noticed about him, was his intent in listening to me, who he didn't know, or a friend of Freddie's. But not many people are so completely focused on you, when you're talking, especially if there's a big crowd of people around that they know. And one funny thing about your mom, I would run into her every time I went to TJ Maxx. She was there. But also, just quickly, I used to go to the stand-up in the elections, and I went there New Year's Eve of 1999, 2000.
Oh.
And it was so beautiful. There was a walking meditation that started at 11:45, and we walked around, the chapel until 12:15. So at midnight, we really didn't do anything. But at 12:15, and Peter was walking around, and when the bell stopped, he was standing next to me, And so he kissed me. And then Kathy kissed me too, who was also a friend. She was a Buddhist monk with him. And I thought, wow, this is going to be a special year. And I met Rob 2 weeks later. But yeah, he was wonderful. He was running too, but it was a precious time. And your mom was wonderful.
Yeah.
She really was.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, what you were saying about my dad's attention on whoever he was talking to was something that many people have mentioned, because he just had this immense curiosity about you, no matter who you were, where you came from, and then just you know, this real single focus interest on whoever was in front of him. And you're right, not many people have that. And he had this way of like making you feel like you were the center of the universe when you were talking to him. So yeah. Yeah, very special. And so was my mom, very, very special. And yeah, she was known as Forthright Freddie. So she told me how it was. Not always, people didn't always like what she said, but she was always honest. So I've gotten a little bit of both of them, a little reserve, a little honesty. Yeah. Yes.
Oh, yeah,
1 second.
mentorship part, I mean, I think that's amazing that he mentored so many people with the Paris Review, and I didn't quite realize that that was one of his roles. Well, he didn't do that, do you think? Because like you mentioned, he sacrificed his own writing on some level. There are so few mentors, is what I'm trying to say. There's lots of great writers,
Yeah.
very few people that mentor those writers. So I really admire people like that.
Yeah, I think he felt like the Paris Review was sort of a comfort zone for him. It was a place that he could like sort of be involved with everything, but it wasn't maybe as risky as going out and writing your own stuff. So he could edit other people. And I think he had an instinct for how important it really was. So when everyone else sort of gave up on it, he was unwilling to do that. And then as far as mentoring younger writers, I mean, I'm not sure how much hands-on mentoring it was. I think it was the being in charge of a magazine whose like biggest goal was to find new literary talent. So I mean, I think when Jay McInerney got a call from him saying we want to publish this first chapter of Bright Lights Big City, it was like and then what a career Jay's had since then, and that was Philip Roth and again and again. Yeah, I'm not, but I don't think, and then he would invite them to the parties, and but it wasn't like, let me take you under my wing and teach you how to write, because these people already, it was more like an ability to recognize talent, and then the bravery to publish someone that hadn't been published before, which I think is another thing that not everyone has the courage to do, right? Probably many, many amazing writers out there that just haven't been discovered because no one's courageous enough to like put their faith in them, someone who's not already known, it's like, but yeah, so that was Nick. You were gonna, oh, sorry.
Taylor.
Yes.
Nice to see you, and your father was an amazing guy who I was so happy to know, even so briefly, but the times I did hang out with him, he's incredible and generous and thoughtful and always magnanimous and fun guy to hang out with. And I think of him often when I go past Sagaponack main store there. I think of you and hey. But I was so fascinated too, remarkably, that he was one of the key witnesses in the Robert F. Kennedy assassination. And he was there, and he actually wrestled the gun out of the man's hand.
Yeah.
Can you tell the story of how he came to be there?
Yeah. So, this was one of the few things that my dad himself never talked about. And this was one of the things that made him an interesting journalist, is that he was not I mean, you would think as someone who wanted to write interesting stories, this would be one of the most interesting stories you could tell, but he had a real sense of decorum as far as what one talked about and what one didn't. And for him, I think this was off limits. And I think also probably because it was so heartbreaking to him. He was on the campaign trail with Bobby and my mom, and actually at a certain point, Ethel Kennedy, Bobby's wife, took my mom and dad aside and said, "Look, if you guys are going to be on the campaign trail with us, you have to be married." So it was actually those guys that made my parents get married. It's because of Bobby and Ethel that I even am here, and my son's here, and so. So they were there, along with them. He was a dear old friend. I think they'd been at Harvard together. And when at the Ambassador Hotel, when the assassination happened, he was right there, and he and one of the Secret Service guys were the first ones to tackle Sirhan to the ground and wrestle the gun from his hand. And my mom was there as well, and they were, both there waiting outside the hospital to hear what had happened or hear if he would make it. And he never made it, or he didn't make it. Yeah, so that was, that was one of those moments that, like, as I was talking about, he just, I don't think he could really wrap his head around tragedy like that in a way that he could address it head on and express himself about it. He wasn't up for it. It wasn't what he was interested in. And the same thing when he would do a lot of his participatory journalism, like, he was in the locker rooms with all these amazing athletes, and he could have dug around, and there were lots of affairs going on and things happening that he could have reported on that would have maybe been of interest. But that's just it wasn't what he was interested in. It wasn't what he thought was important to report, but he wanted to show the positive side of things, but also just yeah. So I don't know. I guess my point is that there were certain things that he focused on in his writing that I think he thought were more important, I guess. Yeah.
Very dramatic.
Yeah, very dramatic.
What of ethics?
Yeah, yeah. So, any other questions? Yes.
I already asked a question.
No problem.
I love the Sid Finch prank, and I was, when you mentioned pranks, I thought that's the only one I know of. Was there another prank that rose to that level, or was
Certainly not at that level. I think, yeah, for those of you who don't know about it, it was a Sports Illustrated article that my dad wrote about a Buddhist monk baseball pitcher named William Siddhartha Finch, who could pitch the ball 168 miles an hour. And he learned how to do this by throwing rocks at snow leopards in the Himalayas as he was, and through being like single-minded, focused Buddhist, feats of extraordinary athletic prowess. So anyway, he wrote about this guy. He was a French horn player, and I think one of the things that made it so believable was that it was my dad writing about it. He was a serious journalist and nonfiction writer, right? So you wouldn't expect to be duped by him. And also all the details. If you're going to tell a lie, you got to fill it with great details. It's the secret of good writing, right? And so yeah, and apparently, I mean, besides like the Orson Welles, War of the Worlds thing, it's one of the most widely believed pranks ever. I guess when it came out, came out on April 1st, April Fool's Day. And on the, if you, the title of the, I forget what it was, but if you spelled out each letter from the title of the thing, it said Happy April Fool's Day. And but yeah, I'm trying to think what else he did. I mean, I remember that what inspired him to do this was that he'd read a little article about, which turned out also to be false, but a little article about a man who had decided that he was going to run a marathon in England and had misunderstood that it wasn't supposed to be 26 miles, it was supposed to be 26 days. So he'd been seen, 3 days later disappearing over the like Scottish Highlands or whatever, running for 26 days. And it was that sort of thing that my dad just totally loved. One other thing another prank that he wrote about later, I don't know if it was a prank, but it was mischief. He had like an aggravated bursitis on his elbow, that got infected and his elbow all swelled up, and doing the circles and parties in the city as he did, people kept on asking about it, and finally he just got tired of telling the truth. And at a certain point, an editor friend of his was like, "Yeah, what happened to your elbow, George?" And he was like, "Well, Jason, the damnedest thing, I got bitten by a cobra in India." And so that rumor made the rounds, and my dad had to sort of, fess up at a certain point, but I think he played it up for a while and enjoyed it thoroughly. So it was those sort of things. Yeah.
Have you written your book yet?
I mean, I've written a book. I don't know if it's my book. I mean, I would like to write more books.
What's the title of the book you wrote?
The title of the book that I wrote is called Notes from the Night, and it's a sort of a memoir about my time having too much fun out in the New York nightlife when I was younger with Nick and Dave and Lizzie, Mary, and it was, yeah, actually, Canio's was nice enough to have me come and read from it when it came out. But I haven't, since then, actually, I've done all sorts of little pieces, and but I have yet to come up with another full-length book yet. But I will. There are more in the basket, more in the hopper. Thank you, guys. Thank you all so much.
Just want to echo what people said. Your writing is beautiful, and we do look forward to many books in the hopper coming out in the years to come. So,
thank you.
Thank you for sharing your life story and your heartfelt memories of your dad and bringing him into the room, bringing him alive into the room.
My pleasure.
Anyway,
thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you, guys.